Imagine losing the chance to reconcile with someone you love, carrying regret that weighs heavy on your heart every day. Linda Matthews lived with this pain for years, separated from her daughter Sophie, until a near-death experience led her to an unexpected and transformative encounter. But what happens when life gives you a second chance to reconnect, to forgive, and to finally let go of the past? How will Linda use this new opportunity to heal the wounds that haunt her? What would you do if you had the chance to have one last conversation with someone you love? How can forgiveness transform even the most wounded hearts? If you're curious about how a near-death experience can rewrite destiny and heal broken relationships, this story is for you. Get ready for a journey of faith, hope, and miracles. I'm Anthony Bennett and welcome to my Near-Death Experience channel. Let's listen to the story together. Linda Matthews, a dedicated 55-year-old nurse, has always been known for her compassion and care for patients. Working at the same hospital for more than 30 years, she became a respected and beloved figure among colleagues and patients. However, behind her dedication to her work, Linda carried a deep regret that tormented her every day, her broken relationship with her daughter, Sophie. The weight of this regret was like a constant shadow in her life, something she couldn't escape no matter how much time passed. Linda and Sophie have always had a tumultuous relationship. Sophie was a rebellious teenager, full of dreams and strong opinions, while Linda, worried about protecting her daughter, ended up imposing her own expectations. Fights were frequent, and arguments became a routine in the Matthews household. Sophie, frustrated with what she saw as a lack of support and understanding, began to emotionally distance herself from Linda. What started as small disagreements soon turned into an insurmountable barrier between mother and daughter. The breaking point came when Sophie, aged 19, announced she was leaving college to pursue a career in music, something Linda had always considered unstable and reckless. The argument that followed was the worst they had ever had. Harsh words were exchanged, and Sophie, in tears, left the house. "I don't need you to tell me how to live my life," she shouted before slamming the door. Linda, overcome with anger and fear, did not try to stop her. At that moment, they both said things they would regret for the rest of their lives. The years that followed were marked by painful silence. Sophie did not return home, and the few attempts at reconciliation were superficial and full of resentment. Linda, out of pride and hurt, never made the effort necessary to truly repair the relationship. She buried herself in work, using the hospital routine as a distraction from the pain she felt over Sophie's absence. But at night, when silence filled the empty house, Linda wondered if Sophie was okay, if she was happy, if she still thought about her. Over the years, Linda heard from mutual acquaintances that Sophie had gotten married and had a child, but the distance between them was never bridged. Linda didn't know her grandson and had only seen photos of him once or twice. Every time he thought about Sophie, the regret and guilt intensified. She knew she had failed as a mother, that she should have been more understanding, more loving. But at the same time, the pain of admitting this to herself prevented her from taking the first step towards reconciliation. Now, at age 55, Linda lived alone in a house full of memories but empty of joy. Work at the hospital was all she had, and even that was beginning to lose its meaning. Each day felt like another repeat of the last, and the lack of Sophie in his life was a constant pain, a wound that never healed. Linda knew she was running out of time to fix things, but she didn't know how to start. And then, one peaceful night, something happened that would change everything. It was an ordinary night, or at least it seemed to be. Linda had just gotten home after a long shift at the hospital. As usual, she prepared a simple meal and sat alone at the kitchen table. The television was on the news, but she wasn't paying attention. His thoughts were far away, as always, focused on Sophie. The loneliness she felt was overwhelming, but Linda had learned to live with it. However, that night, a strange feeling began to come over her. While cleaning the kitchen, Linda began to feel a slight headache, which quickly intensified. She thought it was just tiredness, something that would go away with a little rest. But suddenly, a sharp pain shot through his head, followed by a tingling sensation on one side of his body. Linda tried to hold onto the sink, but her legs began to weaken. Panic took over her as she realized something was very wrong. His thoughts became confused, and in a matter of seconds, everything around him began to spin. Linda tried to reach for the phone, but her hand didn't respond. The feeling of losing control over one's body was terrifying. She knew, instinctively, that she was having a stroke. The fear he felt was overwhelming, but there was nothing he could do. In a matter of moments, Linda fell to the kitchen floor, unable to move or call for help. Consciousness began to fade, and as her eyes closed, she thought of Sophie, the only person she wanted to see at that moment. The silence in the house was total. Linda felt her breathing weaken, and darkness began to envelop her. But, contrary to what he expected, this darkness was not cold or scary. It was like a soft blanket, a feeling of calm that slowly lifted her away from the pain and fear. Linda knew she was about to leave this world, and a wave of regret washed over her. "Sophie, forgive me," she thought, as her mind blanked. But then, something extraordinary happened. Instead of being completely plunged into darkness, Linda began to see a distant light, like a bright spot at the end of a tunnel. The light was warm, welcoming, and drawing her closer. Linda felt her body float, light as a feather, as she was pulled towards this light. She couldn't resist. There was an indescribable peace in that place, something she had never experienced before. The pain, the fear, everything disappeared, leaving only a feeling of absolute serenity. Suddenly, Linda realized she was in a different place, a familiar yet strange setting. She found herself in a living room, the room where Sophie grew up. Everything was exactly as she remembered, the furniture, the photos on the walls, even the smell of coffee that always filled the house. But there was something different, something she couldn't immediately identify. In the center of the room, there was a table with 2 chairs, and sitting on one of them was Sophie, younger and smiling, as Linda remembered her in her better days. "Sophie?" Linda called, her voice full of emotion. The figure in the chair looked up and smiled at her, a smile Linda hadn't seen in years. "Hi, Mom," Sophie replied, her voice soft and reassuring. "I was waiting for you." Linda felt a wave of emotions wash over her, joy, sadness, regret. She wanted to run to her daughter, hug her, say everything that was in her heart. But at the same time, she was scared. Afraid that this was just a dream, that Sophie would disappear if she got any closer. Linda stood still, not knowing what to do. Seeing Sophie there, smiling and calm, was like a miracle, something she had wanted for so long but never thought possible. The room around them seemed to vibrate with a gentle energy, almost as if time had stopped, giving them a moment outside of reality to reconnect. "Sophie, is that really you?" Linda asked, her voice shaking with emotion. Sophie nodded, her smile remaining as she reached out to her mother. "Yeah, it's me, Mom," Sophie replied, her voice sweet and filled with a peace that Linda had never seen in her before. "I was waiting for you. Sit here with me." Linda, still in shock, slowly approached the table and sat in the empty chair across from Sophie. The environment around them felt more real than any dream, and Sophie's presence was comforting, but it also awakened in Linda a torrent of feelings that she had tried to bury for years. I'm so sorry, Sophie," Linda began, tears already forming in her eyes. "I'm sorry about everything. I should have been more understanding. I should have supported you more, and now it's too late." Sophie, still smiling, took Linda's hand and held it gently. "It's not too late, Mom. It is never too late for love and forgiveness." These words, so simple and direct, penetrated Linda's heart like lightning. She had waited so long to hear something like this, but never knew how to ask. "But I lost you," Linda whispered, her voice breaking. "I lost you, and I can't go back. What can I do now?" Sophie squeezed Linda's hand more firmly, looking directly into her eyes. "You never lost me, Mom. I always knew you loved me, even when we fought. I just needed you to believe in me, to trust my choices. And even after everything, I always knew that your love for me was real. Now, you need to forgive yourself. This is the missing step." Linda felt as if an invisible barrier within her was crumbling. She always knew deep down that Sophie was right, but admitting it was too painful. Now, standing in front of her daughter, she felt a peace she had never experienced before, as if she could finally let go of the weight she had been carrying for so long. "I don't know how to forgive myself," Linda admitted, tears streaming freely down her face. "I messed up, and I don't know how to fix it." Sophie leaned forward, still holding Linda's hand, and said tenderly, "You've already taken the first step, Mom. You are here, with me. And that means you're ready to leave the past behind and move forward. I forgive you, but you need to forgive yourself too. And you need to go back. Return to those who are still here, who need you." Linda felt a mixture of relief and fear. She wanted so badly to believe that it was possible to forgive herself and move on, but the fear of failing again paralyzed her. "What if I don't make it, Sophie? What if I keep making the same mistakes?" Linda asked, her voice cracking with emotion. Sophie smiled, a smile full of love and understanding. "You are stronger than you think, Mom. And you are not alone. Life is full of second chances, and you have one now. Use it to reconnect with the ones you love. Don't waste any more time with regrets. Go back and live the life you still have, because that's what matters." Sophie's words echoed in Linda's mind as she felt the environment around her begin to change. The living room, so familiar and comforting, began to fade, like a dream dissipating at dawn. Linda felt a lightness in her heart that she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of peace and acceptance that seemed to renew her spirit. But along with that feeling came a gentle tug, as if something was calling her back, away from Sophie, away from that last conversation. "Sophie, I don't want to leave," Linda said, her voice full of pleading. "I want to stay here with you." But Sophie shook her head gently, her smile full of understanding. "It's not your time yet, Mom. You need to go back. There are people waiting for you, people who still need your love, your forgiveness. And I will be with you, always, even if you can't see me." Linda felt the tears welling up again, but this time, they were tears of gratitude. She knew Sophie was right, and for the first time, she was ready to accept that. The light around Linda began to intensify, and she felt her body being pulled upward, as if she were floating back to the surface after a long dive. Sophie's image began to fade, but the words she said remained engraved in Linda's heart. "I love you, Mom. And I am always with you." Those were the last words Linda heard before the light became all she could see, a warm, welcoming glow that enveloped her completely. When Linda opened her eyes again, she felt a wave of pain pass through her body. Her vision was blurry, and she couldn't move, but she knew she was back in the real world. The sound of voices and machines filled the environment around him. Linda realized she was in a hospital room, surrounded by doctors and nurses who were working frantically to stabilize her. She tried to speak, but her throat was dry and her voice wouldn't come out. Everything seemed like a blur, but one thing was clear in his mind: she was back. Time seemed to drag by as Linda struggled to regain full consciousness. Little by little, the figures around her began to become clearer, and she felt someone's hand holding hers tightly. She turned her head with difficulty and saw a face that filled her with indescribable joy. It was Sophie, but not Sophie from NDE. It was Sophie, his real daughter, grown up, with tears in her eyes. Mom, you're awake, Sophie whispered, her voice full of emotion. Linda tried to smile, but her weakness was evident. However, the relief in his heart was undeniable. She was back, and Sophie was there, by her side. Sophie, Linda managed to whisper, her voice trailing off. Sophie leaned closer, still holding Linda's hand. I'm here, Mom. I am here. Linda felt tears run down her face, but this time, they were tears of gratitude and hope. She had been given a second chance, and she didn't intend to waste it. The doctor entered the room, interrupting the moment, but Linda knew she would have time to talk, to resolve everything that needed to be said. Sophie was there, and that was what mattered. The doctor explained that Linda had suffered a severe stroke, but that, miraculously, the damage was minimal and she had a good chance of recovery. Linda just listened, not really processing the words. His mind was focused on Sophie, on everything he still needed to say to her. The following days were challenging for Linda. The stroke had left its mark, and she needed rehabilitation to regain her motor functions and speech. But unlike before, Linda now had a new determination. Each physical therapy exercise, each speech therapy session, was a chance to strengthen herself, to prepare herself for the life she was determined to rebuild. The regret was still there, but now it was accompanied by a renewed hope, the hope that she could still fix what was broken. Sophie was there throughout Linda's recovery. From the moment she woke up in the hospital, Sophie refused to leave her mother's side. She cared for Linda with a patience and love that Linda feared she had lost forever. Every little progress Linda made was celebrated by Sophie, and together they began to rediscover the connection that had been stifled by hurt and resentment for so long. Linda knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild her relationship with Sophie. During the long hours in rehab, Linda and Sophie began to have conversations they had never had before. They talked about the past, about the choices they made, and how they got to the point of moving so far away from each other. Sophie, more mature and understanding now, shared her own regrets, confessing that she also missed her mother and that she had always hoped for a reconciliation, but didn't know how to take the first step. These conversations were painful, but also deeply healing for both of them. You know, Mom, Sophie said in one of these conversations, as she helped Linda walk down the hospital hallway, I always knew you loved me, even when we fought. I just didn't know how to deal with everything at the time. I think I was so afraid of failing that I pushed you away. Linda paused for a moment, holding onto the railing for balance. And I was so scared of losing you that I ended up pushing you too much, she replied, her voice soft but full of emotion. I wanted you to have a safe life, but I ended up stifling your dreams. Sophie stopped and looked at Linda, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I understand now, Mom. And I forgive you. I just want us to move forward, to make up for lost time. These words were a balm to Linda's heart. For years, she carried the guilt of destroying her relationship with her daughter, but hearing Sophie say she forgave her was the key to her own liberation. I forgive you too, Sophie, Linda replied, feeling a lightness in her chest that she hadn't felt in years. These moments of reconciliation brought new energy into Linda's life. She was determined to continue her recovery, not just for herself, but for the life she wanted to rebuild alongside Sophie. They started making plans together, talking about the future, about the things they would like to do when Linda was fully recovered. Sophie began bringing her son, Linda's grandson, to visit her in the hospital, and for the first time, Linda was able to hold him in her arms. The feeling of having a new generation in her family, and of finally being there for them, gave Linda a strength she didn't know she possessed. Linda's recovery was slow but steady. With each step taken, she felt she was getting closer to not just physical recovery, but the emotional healing she had sought for so long. Sophie was by his side every moment, and together, they were rebuilding a bond that, although damaged, was never truly broken. Linda knew that life had given her a second chance, and she was determined to do everything in her power to make the most of it. As the months passed, Linda began to regain her strength and gradually returned home. Although he still needed rehabilitation sessions, his determination to return to normal life was evident. However, normality now had a new meaning for her. Linda didn't just want to go back to her old self. She wanted to seize every moment, every opportunity to reconnect with her daughter, her grandson, and all the things that really mattered. The near-death experience had changed his perspective on what was essential in life. Linda knew she would need to make changes in her life, starting with her work at the hospital. Although she still loved nursing, she recognized that she had used the work as a way to escape the emotional problems she faced at home. Now, she wanted to find a better balance, so she could be present in Sophie and her grandson's lives. With the support of her colleagues and superiors, Linda decided to reduce her working hours, dedicating more time to her family and the things she always wanted to do but never had the time for. Sophie, for her part, was delighted with her mother's new attitude. The two began to spend more time together, not just at medical appointments, but in simple everyday moments, lunch at a cafe, a walk in the park, or simply talking in the living room. Linda also began to get to know her grandson better, spending hours playing with him, reading stories, and discovering the joy of being a grandmother. Every moment with him was a reminder that life was precious and that lost time could be made up for. One of the most significant changes for Linda was the way she began to see herself. For years, she blamed herself for her mistakes as a mother, believing she had failed in her most important role. But over time, she began to understand that the past could not be changed, but the present and future were in her hands. Linda began to practice forgiving herself, recognizing that although she had made mistakes, she now had the chance to be the mother and grandmother she always wanted to be. In addition to reconnecting with her family, Linda also began looking for new opportunities to get involved in the community. She volunteered at a support group for parents experiencing relationship difficulties with their children, sharing her story and helping others find the path to reconciliation. These activities brought new purpose to her life, allowing her to transform her own experience of pain and healing into something positive for others. Linda also took up hobbies she had abandoned years ago. She had always enjoyed gardening, but with the busyness of life and the weight of regrets, she had let the garden at home become neglected. Now, with Sophie and her grandson by her side, Linda has begun to revitalize the garden, planting flowers and herbs, creating a space of peace and beauty where there had previously been neglect. Gardening became a form of therapy for Linda, a symbol of how she was nourishing and renewing not just her physical space, but also her heart and her relationships. Linda's life was far from perfect, but for the first time in many years, she felt like she was on the right path. The NDE he had experienced gave him a new perspective, a new understanding of what really mattered. And with that understanding, she was determined to live fully, taking every opportunity to love, forgive, and connect with those who mattered most to her. Over time, Linda began to realize that the changes she was making in her life were having a profound impact not only on her own happiness, but also on those around her. Conversations with Sophie became more frequent and sincere, and the emotional distance between them was being filled with love and understanding. Linda began to see that, often, it was the little things that really mattered, a gesture of kindness, a word of support, a moment of shared silence. Linda also began to appreciate the little moments in her daily life, things that previously went unnoticed amid the whirlwind of work and stress. The sunlight streaming through the window in the morning, the sound of birds chirping in the garden, the smell of fresh coffee, all of these things began to take on a new meaning for her. Every moment became an opportunity to be present, to live fully, something she had forgotten during years of guilt and regret. One of the most special moments for Linda was when Sophie brought her grandson to spend an afternoon in the garden. As she watched the boy play among the flowers they had planted together, Linda felt an inner peace that she hadn't felt in years. She remembered Sophie's words during the NDE about the importance of forgiving themselves and making the most of the time they still had. Linda realized that she was finally beginning to live by those words, and it brought deep joy to her heart. These simple moments of connection began to heal the wounds of the past. Linda and Sophie talked about their lives, sharing memories and dreams for the future. Sophie, who had always maintained a certain emotional distance from her mother, began to open her heart in a way she had never done before. Linda, in turn, began to better understand Sophie's choices, seeing in them not a rejection, but an attempt to find her own path. This mutual understanding strengthened the bonds between them, transforming what was previously a fragile relationship into something solid and resilient. In addition to connecting with Sophie and her grandson, Linda also began to value her friendships in a new way. She realized that for years she had isolated herself, putting work above all else and neglecting personal relationships. Now, she was determined to change that. Linda started hanging out with friends more, attending social events, and getting involved in community activities. These interactions brought new energy into her life, helping her feel more connected and supported. At work, Linda continued to practice her profession with dedication, but now with a new perspective. She knew that work was important, but she also understood that there were other things in life that deserved her attention and care. Linda began teaching new nurses the importance of work-life balance, something that took her decades to learn. Her life experience became a valuable lesson for those around her, and Linda felt like she was finally doing justice to all the second chances she had been given. Each day, Linda felt more at peace with herself and the choices she was making. She knew there were still challenges ahead, but now she was confident that she could face them with wisdom and strength. The NDE she experienced was not just an isolated event, but the starting point for a profound and lasting transformation. Linda was finally living the life she always wanted, a life full of love, forgiveness, and meaningful connections. As the months passed, Linda continued to reflect on the concept of forgiveness, not just the forgiveness she needed to give herself, but also the forgiveness that involved everyone in her life. She began to understand that forgiveness was an ongoing process, something that required time, patience, and, most of all, love. Linda realized that by forgiving Sophie and herself, she was paving the way for a fuller, resentment-free life. Linda also began to extend this practice of forgiveness to other areas of her life. She began to forgive old friendships that had frayed over time, coworkers with whom she had had disagreements, and even people who had caused her pain in the past. Each act of forgiveness was like letting go of a weight she had been carrying for years, and with each weight she let go, Linda felt lighter, more free to live the life she was building. During this process, Linda and Sophie continued to support each other. Sophie, who also had her own regrets and hurts, began to follow her mother's example and practice forgiveness in her own life. The two began to have in-depth conversations about their experiences and how they shaped their views of the world. These conversations not only strengthened the bond between mother and daughter, but also helped them both grow as people, learning to see the world with more compassion and understanding. One night, as they sat on their porch, Linda looked at Sophie and said, "I think I finally understand, Sophie. Forgiveness is not just about letting go of the past. It's about freeing ourselves to live in the present with all our might. Our hearts." Sophie, holding her mother's hand, smiled and replied, "Yes, Mom. And I think we're on the right track to do that." This moment was one of many that demonstrated how much they had both grown and how committed they were to building a better future together. Linda also began to see forgiveness as a gift she could offer others. In the support group where she volunteered, she shared her journey of forgiveness, encouraging others to do the same. She talked about the importance of not carrying grudges and how forgiveness could open doors to new opportunities and relationships. Her words resonated deeply with those who heard her, many of whom were struggling with their own regrets and hurts. As Linda continued to practice forgiveness, she noticed changes in herself. She was calmer, more centered, and less likely to stress over little things. Forgiveness brought a clarity of mind she had never experienced before, allowing her to see life with new eyes. Every day was a new opportunity to forgive, love, and grow, and Linda was determined to make the most of every moment. This new approach to life not only benefited Linda, but also had a positive impact on everyone around her. His friends, family, and coworkers noticed the change in his behavior and attitude, and many sought his advice and support. Linda became a figure of wisdom and compassion, someone who had faced her own shadows and emerged stronger and fuller. She knew forgiveness was an ongoing journey, but she was grateful to be walking this path, surrounded by love and support. As Linda progressed on her journey of forgiveness and reconciliation, she began to think about the legacy she wanted to leave for her family, friends, and all those who crossed her path. For Linda, this legacy was not in material possessions or professional achievements, but in the lessons of love, compassion, and forgiveness that she had learned throughout her life. She wanted her legacy to be a testimony that it is never too late to change, to reconcile, and to live a full and meaningful life. Linda began documenting her journey in a journal, writing about her experiences, her reflections, and the lessons she learned along the way. She wrote about NDE, about the conversation she had with Sophie during that pivotal moment, and about how this experience changed her. Journaling became a way for Linda to process her emotions, but also a way to leave something behind that could inspire others to follow a similar path of healing and growth. As she wrote, Linda began to realize that although NDE was a turning point, the real transformation happened in the days and months that followed. It was in the daily efforts to practice forgiveness, reconnect with loved ones, and live with purpose that Linda found her true strength. She knew this journey would never have a definitive end, but she was grateful for every step that led her to this point. In addition to writing, Linda began sharing her life lessons with Sophie and eventually her grandson as he grew older. She wanted them to know that forgiveness is one of the most powerful things you can do, and that love, above all, is what really matters. Linda also encouraged Sophie to continue practicing forgiveness in her own life so she can live without the burdens of the past and fully enjoy the present and future. Linda also dedicated herself to making memories with her family, something she felt she had neglected in the past. She organized family get-togethers, short trips, and dinners at home where everyone could get together, laugh, and share stories. These moments became precious to Linda as they represented everything she had achieved on her healing journey. She knew these memories would be the true legacy she would leave for Sophie and her grandson, moments of love, laughter, and connection. Linda's volunteer work also began to blossom in ways she never imagined. She became a mentor to many in the support group, using her own experiences to help others find their way back to love and forgiveness. Linda became a source of inspiration, not just through her words, but through the example she set every day. His life became living proof that transformation is possible, and that forgiveness can heal even the deepest wounds. As time passed, Linda realized that the legacy she was building was more powerful than anything she could have imagined. She had turned her pain into growth, her regrets into lessons, and her life into a testimony of love and compassion. Linda knew that when it was time to leave, she would leave behind a world that was a little better, a little more full of love, because she had chosen to live by the values that really mattered. As the years passed, Linda Matthews continued to live her life with the same renewed purpose she found after her NDE. She stayed true to her commitment to forgive, love, and live fully. The relationship with Sophie became stronger than ever, and Linda was deeply involved in her grandson's life, creating memories that he would carry with him forever. Every day was a new opportunity for Linda to connect with those she loved, to learn, and to grow. Linda also continued to write in her journal, recording each new experience, each new lesson learned. As time passed, the diary became more than just a personal record. It became a source of wisdom that Linda planned to pass on to Sophie and her grandson. She wanted them to know that life is a journey full of challenges, but that love, forgiveness and compassion are the keys to overcoming any obstacle. The diary would be Linda's gift to future generations, a reminder of her journey and the lessons she learned along the way. As Linda continued to live her life with love and purpose, she began to feel a deep inner peace that she had never experienced before. She knew that although there were still challenges ahead, she was prepared to face them with courage and grace. Linda had found the key to a fulfilling life, accepting the past, living the present with purpose, and facing the future with hope. She knew this inner peace was the greatest gift she could have received, and she was determined to share it with the world. However, Linda also knew that life is unpredictable and that each day is a gift. She continued to dedicate herself to her family, volunteer work, and writing, always looking for ways to make a difference in the lives of others. And as time passed, Linda began to realize that her legacy was already being built, not just in the pages of her diary, but in the lives she touched with her love and compassion. One day, while sitting in the garden that she and Sophie had revitalized together, Linda looked up at the sky and felt a deep gratitude for everything she had experienced. She knew that the time she had left was precious, and she was determined to make the most of every moment. "I'm ready for whatever comes," she thought, feeling a deep calm in her heart. Linda knew her journey of healing and transformation would never have a definitive end, but she was at peace with that. She had found the path she had been looking for all her life, and she was determined to follow it with courage and love. Over time, Linda began to see the fruits of her volunteer work and the legacy she was leaving. The people she helped began to follow their own paths of healing and forgiveness, inspired by Linda's example. Sophie, in turn, began to teach her son the lessons she learned from her mother, perpetuating the legacy of love and compassion that Linda had cultivated. Linda's life, which once seemed full of regret and pain, was now a celebration of love, forgiveness, and the possibility of transformation. Linda Matthews, the woman who once felt lost in her regrets, was now a source of light and inspiration to everyone around her. She knew that when it was time to leave, the love and lessons she left behind would continue to live on in the hearts of her family and everyone who crossed her path. And with this knowledge, Linda continued to live each day with joy, gratitude, and a deep sense of peace. The new chapter of her life had begun, and she was ready to embrace it with all her heart.